Good to go. Awesome. Okay, so hello everyone. Like Wendy mentioned, my name is Aawista Chaudhry, and I'm a student at Queen's University. And I wanted to welcome everyone to the third installment of our free mini courses on concepts and careers in cybersecurity. As the field matures and grows, there remains a very large and growing gender gap that's accompanied by a skills shortage within the field. And through these workshops and events, we're aiming to fill both of these gaps by bringing light to some career opportunities that exist in the field that you may or may not know of, and making cybersecurity knowledge more accessible, especially for women. So, the agenda for today is I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to myself and what it is I do with my research and where I am right now. And we'll go through three main types of careers within cybersecurity. So that's penetration testing, incident response, and digital forensics. Finally, I'll leave you with some really cool cutting edge research that's being done in the field to let you know how we're trying to improve different aspects of cybersecurity almost every day. And finally, all those burning questions you'll have through my presentation, you can ask me at the end, and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. So like I mentioned, my name is Aawista Chaudhry, and right now I am away on the internship, as Wendy mentioned, at Deloitte Canada, and I'm interning within the application security domain of Deloitte. And so this is as part of my master's degree, as part of the cybersecurity CREATE program. And I do research within the QRST group here at Queen's. But where I started wasn't exactly in cybersecurity. So I got my bachelor's degree in chemical biology at McMaster University. And after about a year and a half of working as a medicinal chemist, I realized that I wanted to pivot my career towards something where I could see more of an impact every single day. And that's when I discovered the very unique program that Queen's University offers, where I was able to complete a year-long qualifying program. So you can think of it as an accelerated undergraduate degree almost, where you do various courses from computer science to demonstrate your capabilities, learn as you go, and meet some of the faculty members, and then transition into your master's degree. And I feel that this is a very important factor to mention about myself, especially because I wasn't aware or sure as somebody who graduated with a bachelor's in science degree that you can pivot into the cybersecurity field. There's no concrete right path to cybersecurity, so anyone and everyone can have a career in cybersecurity, and there's many, many different ways that you can contribute, and all talents are very necessary. And if you have any questions or any, questions about segueing into the field, please feel free to connect with me both on LinkedIn and email, and I'll be happy to respond. So let's get started. When we think cybersecurity, unanimously, hacking is the first thing that comes to mind. But what exactly is hacking, and who is considered a hacker? Are all hackers just vigilante heroes or destruction-causing criminals? Hacking can actually be categorized into two groups, so ethical hacking and non-ethical hacking. And ethical hackers are those that we can consider to be trusted cybersecurity professionals. But before we lived our lives in the digital age as digital personas, Hollywood played a very important role in defining the image that can be associated with a hacker. And according to obviously very credible sources in Hollywood, a hacker is someone who is very smart and can type extremely fast code in a black box on a screen. They carry a phone or a device with them that lets them get access to any system instantaneously. Obviously, they're very evil by nature, or at least chaotic, or doing something they aren't supposed to be, that vigilante mentality. And finally, their actions are usually so intense that they are of matters of national defense, very targeted from the get-go to a specific system, and so critical in nature. Although in some of the cases, that is true, and that is what hacking is, that doesn't define the majority of what we call hacking within cybersecurity. So what really is it? Well, it's defined as the unauthorized access to a network or computer systems. And this doesn't have to be a big, large corporate entity systems or a nuclear facility. In fact, anything and everything that's connected to the internet is at risk for being hacked. So that could be your laptop, it could be the Zoom calls and the Zoom bombs that we see, but it can also be your coffee machine or your smart fridge. And contrary to popular belief, hacking actually requires a lot of time and patience. There is a lot of knowledge that goes into infiltrating a system because you have to know how something works before you can get into it. And sometimes, and a lot of the times actually, there's a lot of trial and error that goes into these things, requiring many, many, many days. And so hacking is evil when done for the wrong purposes, but not all hacking is legal. Penetration testers are ethical hackers that are actually a part of a very lucrative and rewarding career in cybersecurity for individuals that enjoy the work. And basically, hacking is not all that cybersecurity is about. It's one of the various facets that make up security for protecting things within the cyber domain. So the contemporary view of hackers is one of three types. And usually we can categorize hackers into three different types based on two things: the legality of what their action is and the motives of their actions. So the type of hacker that we're most familiar with are known as the black hat hackers. And they create malware or bad software that can infiltrate a system and get unauthorized access to the system. And this unauthorized access is key in defining their actions as illegal because they don't have illicit permission from the owner of the software, the web application, whatever it may be, to get this access. Black hat hackers are usually motivated by personal or financial gains that they can apprehend from infiltrating the system. So they can steal data, they can sell it, they can manipulate data for personal reasons, or even just destroy the system to prevent access to this data. And finally, there are more dangerous type of hackers within black hat hackers that are driven by the sheer desire to just cause chaos within a given system. And this is what caused in 2016 a power outage because a hacker infiltrated and got access to the Ukraine power grid, and the entire country was without power because the hacker just wanted to prove a point. On the other end of the spectrum, we have what we know as the white hat hackers, and these individuals test and penetrate the vulnerabilities of a system. So by default, they're known as pen testers, and they conduct monitoring of the in-place security systems to do vulnerability assessments. They do have the same skill sets, the same tools, and the same capabilities as black hat hackers, actually even sometimes more. Yet what distinguishes them is the fact that they have explicit permission from the business or software owner to test the software in this way. And it's actually become a very common step in software development, web development, or even application development at both the government and commercial level to ensure that weak points of the system can be identified and patched before loss does occur. Somewhere in the middle of black hat hackers and white hat hackers, we have what we call gray hat hackers. Now, I want to distinguish gray hat hackers from white hat hackers with the defining characteristics that what they do is not legal. They penetrate a system where they try and get unauthorized access to a system, but they don't have the explicit permission from the business owner. And now what makes them different from black hat hackers is the fact that once they get in and find these vulnerabilities, they usually go to the business owner and expect or demand a reward in order to not publicize this information that they found from unsolicited hacking activities. So because their actions can't be classified as legal, even though they don't take advantage of the data, it's something that's within the gray zone and not exactly quantifiable unless you look at each individual case itself. So penetration testing is usually outsourced to external resources. And this is because a company can then get a fresh perspective as the hacker looks at the enterprise or software the same way a malicious hacker would and tries to get in without too much or too little knowledge of the system itself. Now, there is an industry certification that exists called the Certified Ethical Hacker. And owning this certification generally makes one seem more attractive because it's a certificate that vouches for your capabilities as a hacker. But I do want to emphasize that it definitely is not the only way to become a penetration tester. In fact, having experience with penetration testing of various applications, as well as self-learning, can be just as effective as landing you that job if this is something that you're interested in pursuing. Ethical hackers can be hired to do various types of projects and works. For example, they can be hired to work on internal or external networks from the perspective of either an employee or an outsider. Web applications are also becoming very common with the boom of e-commerce sites, especially within the context of the pandemic, and also mobile applications or even APIs. Penetration testing itself occurs in phases, and different standardizations will offer slightly different or modified versions of what the cycle is. You see on the slide here on the right. But usually how to best follow the cycle and what stages to follow is left up to the discretion of the practitioner themselves and can be modified based on the client requirements. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what happens at each of the phases. In the first stage, a penetration tester will do the planning and the preparation. In this stage, it's very important to collect details based on what is being asked of you, what is the task at hand, and what is the client looking for in terms of their requirements. And finally, what is the expectation of infiltration? So first, in information gathering, the pen tester must look at what are the tests that I need to perform in order to have what we can call a successful pen test. And you can determine if the pen test will be network-based or identity access-based. If the client has more than one type of application, you can determine which applications are included in these tests and how many tests will be required per each application. You can also define the degrees of impact the client is hoping for you to achieve. So are you expected to get to the main database where critical information is, or will it be more of a remote access to one of the workstation, and that's enough to prove that you've penetrated the system successfully? Determine what information will be provided to you and how you're expected to conduct this test. So will you go in blind as the same way as an unethical hacker would and try and figure it out as you go, or will the generic data or network structure be provided to you? As a facet of information gathering, the scope of each of the tests also needs to be determined. This defines what you'll be doing in each test to which part of the system. And I might even argue that this would be the most critical step in the preparation phase. Remember that legality thing we were talking about earlier? Yeah, this is where it comes into play. So you want to make sure that you're getting the entire scope of what you are and aren't allowed to do in writing so that you are ensured that this is what the client did ask for. Everything from the application, what will be done, etc. And also from a business perspective, it's important to ensure that you're providing services and being compensated for those services accordingly and not doing too much or too little based on whatever services it is that you offer. Finally, for any successful project, you also need to define what needs to be physically accomplished. So this is determining what success looks like to the person who's hired you to do this work. Do they require privilege escalation? Is there a specific access level they're hoping to see if you can get to, etc.? And this will obviously differ from client to client. The next stage is the meat of the entire process. Once you have the scope and the criteria defined, we can move on to reconnaissance. Now, you may ask, how is this any different from information gathering? Well, now that you know what it is that the hack requires, this is officially the beginning of the hack itself. Reconnaissance involves processes and techniques that can be used to covertly discover and collect information about a target system. Covertly, because we can remember that the goal of a hacker is obviously to remain hidden and not get caught. So usually most systems will have at least baseline security where if you're trying to do something by brute force, like trying out all different passwords that you possibly can, you'll most likely get locked out and get detected. And so for the perspective of a black hat hacker, it isn't the most smart way to carry out your attack. There's many different ways in which you can do reconnaissance, but I've categorized it here based on two categories, basically. So one is social engineering, and the other one is technical aspects of reconnaissance. You may be familiar with social engineering, as during the pandemic, it's become more and more widespread and more people are becoming aware of what it is. So it's defined as a tactic that's used by malicious individuals to try and gather important little tidbits about a company or the way that it's organized. It usually involves tricking someone into divulging information or clicking a link, and can vary in what it looks like based on how creative the hacker is. Baiting, for example, is when someone can come up to you in a social setting and strike up a conversation to try and get you to divulge important information. And this can range in what that information is. So they can ask you seemingly innocent questions about what time you arrive at the office, who sits next to you, what's your boss's name, what team you work in, if there's a hierarchy to those teams, what your email address is, etc. As you'll see with some of the technical aspects of reconnaissance, any one of those pieces of information can actually prove pivotal in helping anyone get access into the system itself. Another popular form of social engineering that I'm sure you've probably heard of is phishing or vishing. So phishing is the act of sending a curated email tailored to a specific individual with a malicious link either embedded into the file itself or a file that's masked as a potentially dangerous software, so a malware or a virus, and trying to get the recipient of the email to click on it and install your software. In COVID, vishing has also become very popular with individuals, especially at risk for, in a demographic that's at risk for not completely understanding the digital context of what it is they're giving up. So vishing is if someone will try and call you and ask you for your SIN number, your date of birth, your pet's name, etc. And phishing emails because phishing emails are usually grafted with very specific credentials, they try and appear very authentic. So whoever is reading the email will think it's actually from the bank or somebody you know and click on it. And many have fallen victim to phishing, especially within the last few months as we've migrated mostly online. Spam email, on the other hand, are emails that are also sent with spoofed credentials and information like phishing emails, but they're sent in bulk. So there's a lot of it, and usually it also contains harmful files or links to try and get to the same end goal as phishing emails. Now, tailgating is a form of social engineering that lets malicious individuals bypass physical security measures. The most basic form of security is having access control to servers or desks, whatever it may be. And if a tailgater can kind of get in on a swipe of somebody else and follow them really closely, they can bypass easily those physical restrictions and get access to the different parts of the company. And then they're able to either look at documents that may be lying around or get access to an open workstation that someone has left and get very dangerous outcomes through tailgating someone into the building. One of the most creative yet malicious forms of social engineering that I've ever heard of is the lost and found USB. So what hackers or malicious individuals will do is they'll take a USB that has malicious software installed onto it and leave it in the parking lots of various companies that they're hoping to get into. And so if one of the employees will go into the parking lot and they'll find a USB, automatically you think that this probably belongs to someone who's at the company because the parking lot belongs to, the cars in the parking lot are of the employees that work there. So naturally you take the USB and you plug it in to see if you can find the name on a document or anybody who it belongs to, so you can be a good Samaritan and return that USB. Now, unfortunately, as soon as you plug this USB into your computer, it's too late because the malicious software is already installed and the hacker is into your software and now can get access to the entire company. anything and everything out there can be used to potentially take advantage of the way that the company is structured, or give a hacker information about what the company looks like so you can get in. There's also various techniques that are technical in which reconnaissance can be carried out once social engineering has given some sort of pivotal information that's listed here. In the next few slides, I'm going to walk you through some of these technical techniques so that you can see how easy it can be to get, you know, some sort of information and reveal something or other about the client and move on from there. So the first is whois. When you register a domain name, say for example on the World Wide Web, or have an IP address, the ICANN, or the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, requires that you register your name and submit your personal contact information for something known as the whois database. In the seemingly innocent days of the internet, when there was about 5 websites up and they thought it was going to be used for research facilities communicating with each other, this was a great idea. You could look up who is the registered owner of a specific domain name and get in contact with them. This database definitely was not created with the foresight of the internet becoming anything and everything that we use today. So now anybody can go up and look up the registered domain name of anybody out there and get pertinent information. For example, this was me typing in whois from my command line and typing in reddit.com. So it will go use the whois database, look up the domain name reddit.com, and all the information you see here is something that I can get without any sort of privileged access to the system. And so it tells me what the domain name is, the domain ID, it tells me what the server is, when it was created, when the registry will be expiring. So that's when Reddit will have to go back and renew their name, and basically who the contact information is. So if you see here, there's a registrar abuse contact email. That's an email that can get me into the system, and now I can start targeting using very carefully crafted phishing emails to get them to click on something or install malware that can get me through their outside security forces. And below you can see a lot more information about where the company is located, where it's registered from, what country it operates out of. And when we're looking at data and accessibility and how data is standardized, that information can be key in finding out more about how you can access the data. Next, we have the Nmap, or the network mapping tool, and this allows an individual to scan all of the ports of a given IP address or a machine to determine what ports exist and how many of them are open to a potential connection. Now, there was a lot of technical terms there, so a network is just a collection of various individual workstations or computers. An IP address, you can think of it as a specific identifier that's unique to each computer or each connected device on that network. And a port is basically a communication channel that different applications in your computer can connect to, and through those ports be able to talk to your specific application, your computer, whatever it may be. So this is me, again, using my handy dandy computer to use the command line tool Nmap and check what ports exist on the website scanme.nmap.org. And you can actually put in either a website or an IP address if you know what the IP address is. And I've used the -v here to give me a verbose output to tell me and to say to Nmap, hey, go do this and tell me what you're doing along the way as you do it. So I started it and it started going at 2216 and it started the ping scan to see if scanme.nmap.org was alive and something was there listening. Yep, okay, it got a ping back. It said that I'm listening. So then it started doing its resolution to find the IP address in about 0.1 second. It found out who was at the other end and what computer was listening, and then it started doing these scans over here from that IP address. And so once it was done, it told me, hey, your host is up, someone is listening, and I found 4 open ports at this host. So down here you can see the port number which is the 22, the 88, and you can see what protocol is listening or the method of the language of communication at that port. So here, all of them are TCP, which is Transport Control Protocol, which you can think of as the general talking language of the internet, how all computers talk to each other, and the state that the port is in. So all of these are open. And then the service, which is the important part, is what application is listening at these ports. So I know that nmap.org has a very secure system, but for example, if this was an insecure target or somebody I was looking to get access to, I can see that there is an open SSH port or a secure shell listening at port 22. So if I can get access to the secure port, I can start sending commands to that service and it will play them directly in their secure shell. So it's almost like I have a shell open in that computer and I'm now able to write my commands and get targets into the system. And the other applications you can see here, for example, Elite, there's a lot of databases that exist online where you could just quickly Google vulnerabilities for Elite. And if you know a program is listening and it's prone to a specific type of attack, you can go ahead and talk directly to the application and carry out your attack. The next one, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is ping. And now ping was used in the Stone Age of the internet to kind of ask a computer, hey, are you alive? Are you listening? And if it replied back, that was saying, yep, I'm here. What is it do you need? And so a ping can be used for the same purpose today. And you can ping an IP address and you can see how long it takes you to get a reply back, if a reply even comes, and what the packet faced when it went through. So was it dropped? Was it missed out at any location, etc. And here I've used my command line to ping www.google.com. And so I was successful in getting a ping, and it was sending 64 bytes from my computer, and in the sequence number is just what number of packet was sent, because it will continue sending packets until I stop the ping. How long it took, what the time to live was, which was how many back and forths do you want me to do before you want me to cut this package? You don't want it to go on forever. And down here, we have information about how many packets were transmitted, then how many were received. So because I sent 8, Google sent me back 8 replies every time saying, yep, I'm here. I had a 0% packet loss and how long it took me to complete this transaction. Down here, I have the same thing at an IP address. So this could be anybody's IP address that you can kind of ping to check if they're alive. It doesn't prompt the computer user saying someone is pinging you. The computer automatically just responds back and says, yep, I'm here, I'm listening, what do you want? Go ahead. And obviously you can see that this can be used to do very malicious things as well, to check what's alive and what isn't. A specific type of attack is called the ping of death. So ping was created, again, a long time ago, not understanding or completely comprehending what the internet will grow to become. So in ping, you can do what's called the ping of death, where the packet that you send out is so large that once at the other end, the computer puts it back together to understand what it is that you're trying to say. You overflow the buffer that's allocated for these messages, and now you're in the actual memory of, say, a working process, and you're able to carry out remote code at this receiving location. Finally, we have traceroute. So traceroute is also a network diagnostic tool that's used to track in real time the pathway that a packet takes from a source IP to a destination IP. And along the way, it tells me all the IP addresses of the routers that it pinged in between. So you can see here, this is me using traceroute to go to example.com. Now for this one, I did need admin privileges on my end. So I used sudo here to get admin privileges. And I asked it to send an ICMP packet and tell me, what do you hit until you get to your destination? So for example.com, I can start my route and I can see the IP address of every single computer or router or cloud or whatever it is that was hit before I can get to my final tool and final IP destination. And obviously you can see that this could be a very effective tool in creating a map and layout of the network to understand where I need to go and how can I get there. It can also help you find out if there's a firewall that prevents you from getting access, because usually firewalls will block some sort of packet. If they identify that someone is sending things, too often, they'll try and stop you from getting there. And then sometimes you'll get back stars, as you see here at number 10 and 11. And stars just mean that I timed out. So there's a specific time in which I get a reply back. And if I don't, it moves on to the next step. So that's another way you can try and protect your computer from these attacks. So with extensive information gathered, pen testers can now have a good idea of what the layouts are, and they can now take advantage of these systems to get in from an outside perspective. Once they're in, they can use these newly gained entry points to test all of their weaknesses. Two main objectives for mass infiltration from a penetration tester's perspective would be to get as many computers as they can, access to them, and get as high up as they can in terms of what they can do. So the first thing is lateral movement. So say that Bob's computer was successfully penetrated into and is the point of entry. Now from Bob's computer, I'm going to try my best to get into Alice's and everybody else's computers, because everybody has different access to different data, so I can get as much data as possible. And finally, I want to be able to get admin level access. So that's privilege escalation. And there's many tools that exist for penetration testers, both open source and non-open source, that can help you do that. So some are the Burp Suite, which is for web penetration testing, and it allows you to do the entire process from this one suite of tools. Some I've mentioned before, like Nmap, and some password cracking tools such as Hashcat or John the Ripper. Metasploit is another penetration testing framework that lets you identify many different vulnerabilities on networks. And finally, Wireshark, which is a very powerful tool that's open source, and it allows you to monitor network traffic. So if I'm into the system, I can use Wireshark to watch all different interactions and read them in a human readable format to maybe get more information about the network or who's talking through it. And finally, the following stage, actually, number 4, analysis and reporting, should be concurrently ongoing with the other stages, right? And when a pen tester is investigating and discovering these vulnerabilities, it's very imperative to keep very detailed notes on the observations, the potential threats that are in the system, etc. After all, the goal of your penetration test is to make it easier to find the vulnerabilities, recreate them, and give the organization a systematic way of patching them up. A good report can include many different components, such as an executive summary for strategic design. So this is because not every person that's going to be reading the report is going to have the technical acumen to understand what it is that they're looking at, and also have a technical walkthrough supplementing that, so that the IT team of this company can kind of look at your recommendations and follow through with them. And finally, it's very important to provide many different flexible options for remediation. You don't want to go back to your client and just say, don't use the software. That's not very helpful, because not in all cases, it may not be true that the company can just drop a certain software or not do a certain thing, and might be very important to the way that they conduct their business. Once you're done, it's very important to clean up and all of the digital footprints that you may have created. And with the report, the business is able to then go back in and implement the strategies and the designs for the remediation and observe what the best practices are. It's important to note that you should also go back and clean up any artifacts that you personally may have access to. So don't keep any of the company's data, and debrief the company both over a report and verbally on what was discovered. And they may come back at a later time with new vulnerabilities or a new application for you to test. And this is a cyclical process, so it's ongoing as software improves and moves forward. So that was the testing cycle from the penetration tester's perspective. So black hat hackers, unethical hackers, they actually use a very similar cycle themselves, but obviously the intentions and the outcomes are different at each of the stages. In planning and preparation, they want to look at who they're targeting, why they're going to be hacking this company, and what can they gain from performing this attack, either personally or financially. A lot more time and energy is spent on the reconnaissance stage, because these hackers can't have anybody knowing that they're trying to get into the system and get their defenses up. The worst thing that happens for a penetration tester is, it's a little embarrassing. The company finds out that you're hacking their system and you should be more careful. But for a black hat hacker, identification could directly relate to jail time and not them being able to accomplish what it is they're looking to accomplish. Also, for black hat hackers, once they have penetrated and they're in the system, there's more destructive action, right? So they're going to want to take the data or destroy it, as we talked about earlier, and they're going to want to do something with this data, either hold it for ransom or distribute it and sell it online, whatever that may be. And finally, another key factor is that black hat hackers will always install something called a backdoor. So one-time theft is great. You get in, you get your data, you get out. But it's a lot more effective if a black hat hacker is able to let themselves back in at a later time. So imagine that they allow themselves an open SSH portal, like we talked about earlier, where they can just get root access or administrative access from their own computer at a later time and do whatever they need to. Just how impactful having long-term access to internal workings can be. I'll explain that to you in a few slides to show what the detrimental impact can actually get to. So in order to define black hat hackers as cyber criminals, we need to completely understand or define what cybercrime is, right? And so the digital world's transformation has been a very recent development, and therefore cybercrime is an ever-changing, ever-encompassing term itself. So specifically, it's the intentional, unlawful behavior against an entity, either using a computer system or offline application, or targeting a computer system or offline application. An example of crime that uses a computer would be a denial of service attack. In this type of attack, the aim is to make certain services unavailable for the intended audience by overwhelming the servers with illegitimate requests. So I can, for example, send Google a billion requests so other people aren't able to access the server and get the information. Cybercrime that targets a computer can often involve things like viruses and other types of malwares that will cause damage to the targeted system, and the targeted system is a computer and is related to cyber. Other types of cybercrime can include software piracy, so illegal download or access to specific software without either paying for it or knowledge of the owner. Phishing, as we talked about earlier. Spoofing, so making or accessing a specific database or specific piece of information or software but not letting them know who you are and who's doing the access. Identity fraud is pretty self-explanatory. Ransomware attacks is where once you get into the system, you use encrypting software to encrypt everything that's on a specific computer network and ask for money, usually in the form of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency to encrypt the software. And unfortunately, most of the time, people that are carrying out these attacks don't know how to decrypt it. So you're left paying them money and not getting back anything at all. Cryptojacking is something that happened, if any of you are aware, a few months ago on Twitter when seemingly Bill Gates was asking for everybody to transfer him Bitcoins. That's stealing of electronic money. So anything like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. And cyber extortion, pretty self-explanatory again. Extortion either using or targeting cyber. So in December of last year, arguably one of the most impactful and intrusive cyber events of the decade, if not ever, took place. It was discovered that there were multiple data breaches as a result of a foreign hacker group that was able to penetrate various parts of the United States federal government. The duration of this entire attack was 8 to 9 months. It started in March 2020 approximately, suspectedly, and wasn't discovered until December 2020. The suspected group didn't only successfully infiltrate, but they tactically remained present within the system for the entire time and were not detected. Some of the departments that were affected included the U.S. Treasury Department and the U.S. Department of Commerce. And it still remains unknown how exactly they got in, what they took, and what was stolen in its entirety. Now, imagine that this hack is happening and the government becomes aware of this attack as it's occurring itself. So someone noticed notices a massive bandwidth that corresponds to exfiltration of data and doesn't really look normal to what happens on that network on a given day. So what would that person do? And how do you exactly handle the situation when you're in the middle of it? This branch of cybersecurity is known as incident response. It involves the detection and response of ongoing cyber attacks, threats, or events in efforts to eliminate the threat, minimize the damage in the process, and recover from the incident at the end of it. These are what we can call the frontline workers of cyber, so the cops of the cybersecurity community. And to engage in an effective response, the organization needs a team that can carry out the response in a fast, organized, and efficient manner. So what exactly is incident response? Well, incident response is a specified methodology or standard operating procedure that an organization develops for handling cyber-related events, whether that's an incident, a breach, or a threat that the community is preparing for. The plan can actually vary from company to company, obviously, but it's usually set to encompass various levels of severity for these incidents. So depending on the severity, different procedures are invoked. And different levels of incidents also refer to which members of the C team will be present. So the C team is your CEO, CFO, etc., based on the requirement for damage control and decision making that will be required as a result of the incident. The team is usually composed of many different types of individuals that have very specific goals and duties that they must undertake at the onset of the incident. The team can involve incident response manager, security analysts, triage analysts, forensic analysts, and even threat researchers themselves. So the cycle for conducting incident response remains a very unilaterally applicable cycle itself. The first step, as is the first step for any good standard operating procedure, is preparation. And this is key because it allows you to get a list of all of your critical assets. So your workstations, what needs to be protected, if it's documents, the type of data, what are the critical endpoints, etc. And getting a baseline read of what the network traffic actually looks like on them on a given day-to-day basis. You don't know if something is an anomaly unless you know what normal looks like, right? So once you have this, you can create guidelines to be ready for the types of incidents that these critical assets are vulnerable to, and having measures in place to exactly outline who does what and when. Furthermore, it's also important to have communication guidelines during the actual event itself. There needs to be communication between the various levels and the various types of individuals that are on the incident response team. If there's no communication guidelines, you get silos of information, and those make it very difficult to understand holistically what's going on, especially in larger organizations of 50,000, 10,000 people. The next step, once you have the preparation, is actually the detection and analysis of identifying a security event. Like, okay, I'm looking at the events, I'm looking at the many monitoring systems that I have, and based on what traffic normally looks like, I'm noticing that an event is happening. And so you can look at things like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and you can look at all of these and corroborate information to identify what is the incident and how it's ongoing. You're going to be collecting a lot of data for analysis and looking for, identities that indicate compromise, that you have been infected or something is happening right now. And this usually involves digital forensics, but we'll touch up more on that a little bit later. And finally, during this time, you want to build a timeline of activities. So this helps you decide, okay, how bad is it? What is it? What are we needing to worry about? Is it our data? Is it, our patented information, etc.? And, how can we move forward from here? Once you know what is happening and you're pretty much aware of what's happening, you can move on to the next stage of containment, eradication, and recovery. So based on the information that you've gathered, you can stop the bleeding and patch the entry point. If there's a specific entry point you found, and this is how they're getting into the system, you want to close that as soon as possible so they can't continually get into the system, right? Eradication is then removing what is within the system entirely. So it's like if you have a malware or if you're encrypted because there's a ransomware attack ongoing, you want to coordinate wiping and rebuilding with coordinating a shutdown, restoring from backups, and getting to the previous state to where the company or organization was before the attack started happening. And side note, this is why it's very important to periodically get backups of your system so that you're able to get to that point and not at risk for losing, all of your data and whatever it may be. And finally, once the threat has been, contained and eradicated, you can resume normal activities with something called a business continuity plan, and that outlines what needs to be done so we can go back to the way that things were. Finally, we have the post-incident activity. So this is another one of the very important aspects of incident response. It's looking at what happened and trying to understand what can we learn from it. And what this allows for is a lot more education and, identification of what can we do to better prepare for such an attack moving forward. If any new vulnerabilities are brought out, you can educate the organization and find a better way to patch up these vulnerabilities and fill in any gaps in your security. An incident response report must also be completed so that you can have a future reference point where you can go back and understand what happened and how was it successfully dealt with. At this point, there's also types of organizations that have private data, and according to the laws of an organization, the standardization, so whether that's HIPAA, PIPEDA, whatever it may be, some organizations also need to inform the public that there was a data breach and the public's data may have been compromised. So banks need to do that, healthcare systems need to do that, etc. And then identify the damage that comes from, losing public trust. Finally, you'll notice that this cycle isn't a one-way cycle, right? The arrows go back and forth, and this is because incident response is such a dynamic, dynamic and involved process. Sometimes you'll detect and analyze and you'll find something, and once you eradicate it, you'll go back and you look and you'll say, oh, there's still something ongoing. It's something that had gone undetected before. So you need to go back and you need to do more detection and analysis to find out what can we do to stop it, and go back and forth until you completely have recovered from the ongoing event. Oh, sorry. Okay. Awesome. So to do incident response, we need ongoing vigilance techniques to identify potential threats. So intrusion detection is something that encompasses tools and software that let an organization monitor and detect any sort of illicit or unexpected activity that may be ongoing. And these tools are constantly being developed in research and in industry to extend current capabilities of security products and services and catch up to the different types of attacks that are continuously being detected almost on a given day, especially given the context of the pandemic. So I'll touch up on some of the important and most widely used tools. The first is the intrusion detection systems, and these are generically devices or software that monitor systems or networks for malicious activity or any sort of policy violations. You can have them be network-based or host-based. So a network-based one will analyze incoming and outgoing network traffic, whereas the host-based intrusion detection systems will look at operating system files and internal activities within a certain domain. So you'll have one on the outside of the firewall here, and you'll have one on the inside with internal monitoring. There's two types, so they can do either anomaly detection or signature based. Anomaly detection can be, you can think of it like, this is what normal behavior looks like. And anytime you see something that's not normal behavior, call that an anomaly and raise a flag. And on the other hand, you have signature based, which is, here's the signature of what bad software looks like. Anytime you find the signature in any one of the softwares, alert me. So it's just a different approach. And sometimes you can even have a hybrid approach. Another popular tool I'm sure you've heard of is a firewall, which is almost like a barrier between your network and the outside. And this can be configured or can be out of the box solutions. So some small companies will just use, out of the box solutions that are good enough, but some companies need very specific types of firewalls. And these can also be anomaly based or signature based, and you can teach them rules for what is and is not allowed versus should be ongoing within the system. And now getting into more aggregates, we have what we can call the Security Information and Event Management System, or SIEM. You'll hear this catchphrase a lot, especially in information security, but also with incident response positions, and you'll hear it a lot in job descriptions. It's basically software solutions that can aggregate all types of activity. So network, internal, different resources, looking at the servers, and looking at it all in one place. And it allows for a very holistic way of approaching security, whereas before it was more siloed. With this holistic way, you can corroborate information as well. So not only what's happening on the network, but, oh, do I see more traffic internally as well? Is someone accessing something, etc.? And this makes way for a lot of data analytics and artificial intelligence applications within intrusion detection. And there's some really, really cool ways that artificial intelligence is being applied to individually, IDS firewalls, but also to active monitoring and identifying what's going on without the need of a human operator at one end of it. So unfortunately, despite the extensive research, despite the industrial development, we're still a long way away from claiming complete security in the digital space. And honestly, because of the ever-changing nature of software, it's always going to be an arms race, and it's always going to be, battle of who's better and who's not. Therefore, there's the need for digital detectives to go in after something has happened and analyze, the scene of the crime to figure out what happened and who did it. So we can cue the digital detectors. Digital forensics is the branch of cybersecurity that looks at investigating, analyzing, and reporting events related to cybercrimes. Both type of cybercrimes, so both related to targeting and using computers and network systems. There's different types of data and forensics that we can find out and to help catch the culprit with detailed evidence. And actually, in more recent years, digital forensics has been pivotal in proving innocence, where before it was very difficult to do so in scenarios of the law. So I know what you must be thinking. The police can see my browsing history. Haha, this is why I use incognito mode. Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but browsing history is probably one of 38 different places that investigation for forensics can actually explore. The roles and the job of a forensic investigator is to, like I said, reconstruct, uncover, and analyze digital information to help in investigation and solve computer-related crimes. And the types of investigations can vary from internal to external investigations, whether that's looking at fraud within a company, doing audits, or looking at a specific crime that's happened, such as looking at child trafficking or human trafficking from the online scenarios and how they carry them out, how people communicate, etc. The tasks and the roles are many. So first, the investigator needs to obtain the digital evidence and maintain the chain of command. In the legal context, for anything to be admissible in court, you need to be able to prove that nobody could have tampered with the evidence. With something as dynamic as a computer, you can see it's very easy for someone else to go in and cause damage by, planting evidence, whatever it may be. So the forensic investigator on scene will be in charge of making sure that that can't happen. And then once it's obtained, the investigator can then also be required to trace and track any sort of hackers using digital footprints. And this is actually where a lot of the interesting tools are used, and tools that can extract metadata, find hidden footprints that can lead back to who the original culprit was, etc. You can recover and delete damaged data that might be in the hard drive but may not exist on the user interface. And did you know that once you delete a file, it's technically not deleted immediately from your computer? So what's actually deleted is the link in your software management system, whether that's a Windows operating system or Linux or Mac. The link is deleted, so you can't access it, but it remains intact in memory until and unless another program overwrites it. So in one of my courses, digital forensics, I was able to go back into the image of a computer and follow tables that identify where in memory specific files are stored, and find the whole file completely intact. And it was very, monumental in identifying who the culprit was, because it had evidence that was flat out something that someone thought nobody would be able to see, but is recoverable. And other artifacts that forensic analysts can investigate similarly will include the memory, so what's happening on your RAM right now, and that also includes the processes, so what's running in the background, the front ground, what has been running, how long, etc. Emails, even if they're deleted, attachments, documents, something like who opened a specific document at a certain time, file openings, the size of the window on the screen when you had the file open, how long you looked at it, and if your cursor was over it, where your cursor hovered, deleted evidence. It's truly a plethora of things you can find when you're looking. So like the other two rows, there's a roughly outlined process for how a forensic analyst conducts the investigation. First things first, they go in and on a running computer, you attach an external drive to get a snapshot or an image, or to clone the entire computer's content and what's happening on it. And this is because when you do the investigation, obviously you don't want to change anything on a computer. It's a live machine. So whatever you do, whether that's a cursor movement, a key, it's going to change what's happening, and it might overwrite something that's key in your investigation, however that may be. So you create an exact copy of the device to get a snapshot. And what you do is you also do a memory dump, and that's looking at the RAM and the processes and dumping it onto the USB as well. And then you leave it as it is. You don't touch it, you don't move it. Once you have all of this information, it's actually from the copy itself that you're going to be doing the investigation. So the first thing you do is you carve it, right? And you carve the image. And what that means is carving will allow you to unearth all the artifacts that may be hidden within the disk, so files, anything that's deleted, and it brings it to a very easily readable format. And then using this, the analyst can begin their investigation. And all the artifacts they find are used, and obviously a very extensive report is created where the evidence is outlined and demonstrated for why the evidence is important. And finally, a timeline is created. What happened? When did it happen? Who was the user? What was logged in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So using the reports that are created, it's important to note that the analyst provides a professional opinion on the events that happened, how they happened and by whom, but they don't make the verdict on who was and wasn't guilty and why, because that's the job of the jury and the judge, right? So here's an example. There's many tools, right, that can help an investigator in finding evidence. They can be very simple command line tools to entire softwares. I'll demonstrate the one that I've personally used. So the Sleuth Kit is a C library, and it's a collection of file and volume analysis tools. It can show you hidden content as well, and partitions of a volume that may be hiding certain things. And the autopsy is basically the graphical user interface to the Sleuth Kit. So over here, this is one screenshot from autopsy, and you can see many different capabilities of the software. So you can look at the timeline being created here of the various artifacts that somebody has found. And these artifacts are not one type of artifact, but holistic across the entire computer. So whether that's an image, whether that's accessing of a specific folder, specific document, what somebody clicked, hyperlinks, etc. You can display the time of the computer itself in their local time or in universal time, which is something that forensic analysts use a lot of to kind of put into context across the different time zones, if that's a factor in the investigation. And you can look here to see how you can find a detailed view of what each artifact is. So you can look at the metadata, where it's located, a description of it, and then over here you can look at the image itself. You can also look at the hex data, any strings, metadata, etc. And sometimes if you have hidden content, you can go in and find it within the metadata super easily. Next, we have another screenshot of Autopsy, and I just wanted to really emphasize the capabilities here. So this is basically an investigation happening on my data source, and you can filter by anything and everything. So we can look at images, videos, documents, executables, deleted files are automatically carved out. Extracted content, so devices attached, what USB was attached at what point, who attached it, who was logged in, metadata from anything that was browsed on the internet, so including cookies, email, etc. Then you can look at operating system information, installed programs, and what you have open here is basically links. So anyone that clicked on a link, whether that's on your desktop, in a folder online, and follow that path directly. And then again, like with the previous slide, you can have the extra details and metadata here. And this is basically something that can both be done manually, but Autopsy has just made it automated. So it's a lot easier and effective to be able to do. There's many other tools that are available for forensics. Steganography, for example, is the technique of hiding something secret within an ordinary, not secret file and encrypting it so that you don't get detected. So if you notice a file or an image that is supposed to be 2 or 3 MB and all of a sudden it's 4 GB, there's something that's being hidden. But when you open it regularly, it looks like a regular image, right? And you can go back in and extract using something called the bulk extractor to find out what it is that's hidden and find more information. Volatility is used mainly for memory forensics, like I mentioned. You can basically look at what process is running, what network sockets are activated, being used, network connections, what libraries are there, registry hives, etc., etc., etc. And browser history is self-explanatory. Just want to mention that most of these are all free under the GPL license and can be used by anyone and everyone to conduct investigations. So, as I mentioned before, I'm part of the NSERC Cybersecurity Create program, and I want to leave you guys with some of the really cool research that's being done to try and, come up with ways that we can stay ahead of the arms race that has started and will continue to go on until security by design is implemented into our softwares. Some projects, for example, from Dr. David Skillicorn are detecting fraud by looking at financial reports using data analytics. And he also does analysis of words or languages from quarterly and annual reports that's made public by companies to look at the way that it's reported and find fraud that exists within these companies by up to 80%. Another really cool thing that they do is understanding the sociological, derivatives of how a hacker operates. Are hackers similar to criminals that operate, offline? What makes them have this mentality? How do they carry it out, etc.? And one really cool thing that his team does is they were able to look at hate forums and the way that individuals will post on these hate forums. And based on the lexical analysis of the language using natural language processing, they can identify, or they hope to identify, how you can call something motive and what distinguishes individuals that only post about hate on online hate forums versus those individuals that post and then go out and do something about it. So anti-terrorism work and how to counter those moving forward. Another doctor is Dr. Stephen Ding, who does really cool stuff related to malware and artificial intelligence. So malware phenotyping is when you have an unknown malware that you've never seen before and being able to break it down using artificial intelligence to find parts that may be similar, right? Because we standing on the shoulders of giants is very true in cybersecurity and in software development, and how we can find parts that are, you know, familiar and then fight against those parts, and build up from there. And finally, another thing that he does is authorship analysis. So you can actually go ahead and analyze the syntax of how code was written, and based on linguistic characteristics, you can identify the person behind the machine writing the malware or writing the code itself. Dr. Mohammed Zulkarnain, my personal, PI, looks at various different machine learning or reinforcement learning applications of intrusion detection systems to better identify threats and try and evade detection from threats that stay within the system for a long time. Those are known as advanced persistent threats. And finally, looking at the security of all these self-driving vehicles that are coming out, and how the government policy and individuals from a security perspective can better prepare so that we aren't subjected to attacks like the Cherokee Jeep that was on a highway and was remotely stopped using Wi-Fi going 100 kilometers an hour, and it came to a complete stop. I highly encourage you to look up that demonstration. It was pretty cool. And I've taken some really cool courses as well, like Digital Forensics, the Cyber Challenge, that let you get a very holistic view of cybersecurity and prepare you for the field as somebody who didn't necessarily come from the technical background. We also have some industry partners, as Wendy mentioned before the beginning of this presentation. Okay, so in summary, by the end of 2021, there's going to be around 3.5 million jobs that go unfilled in the field of cybersecurity. And I can bet that it's only growing with the migration and creation of every product and service being online and having an online component. Despite this, there's only 10% of the workforce comprised of self-identifying women, which is a staggering number because there's definitely a need for more representation. And research has definitely shown the performance and excelling of women within cybersecurity roles because of the personality traits that are required time and time again. And I really do want to emphasize, especially for those career changers, that there's no right path to cybersecurity. Working for Deloitte right now, there's many people I've met, and I don't think a single one of them came from a computer science background. They're all from different walks of life. They're all from different styles and different degrees. I know poli-science students, I know English majors, I've worked with life science majors. All of them are doing great things in the field and have found a specific niche in which they can contribute and really enjoy the work that they do. And here are just some resources to get you started on some of the things that we've talked about today, widely available, and some great sources and courses that are also free and can help you practice some of the things that we've spoken of, or give you more information on some of the not so well-known careers that exist in cybersecurity. Okay, so thank you so much for listening to my talk. So after the break, Anika is going to be presenting the final installment of the mini course series to talk about security in wireless communications. Very, very relevant and super interesting, given that the world that we live in basically operates on wireless technologies. There will also be two experts, like Wendy mentioned, giving valuable networking and opportunities and interesting talk on January 18th and February 1st. So make sure you attend those. As well, we're super, super excited about the cybersecurity case competition happening next Saturday, January the 23rd. Join us for fun, friendly competition, meet some cool new people, and a chance to win some great prizes, right? Like up to $5,000. You'll be able to tackle some real life cybersecurity issues, and we'll be floating around to help answer any questions you're going to have about cybersecurity, or just any, burning questions that you have that you just want answered. And I will now like to thank you for joining my talk. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any other question, and please do email or get in contact with the website, or email Deborah to get any more information about the program. We're always looking for bright young students, and I hope that you enjoyed the talks. Now take any questions you guys may have. Is it possible that black hat hackers turn into white hat hackers in a specific situation, or if they get hired by the companies? Actually, very interestingly, yes, exactly. So I think that a lot of white hat hacking has been inspired by black hat hacking. Penetration testing hasn't existed for a really long time. And so when we noticed that hackers were doing certain things, people on this side of the spectrum thought, hey, why can't we do those things but ourselves, to kind of, go through and do what they do, but for a better perspective. And so definitely they can be converted into white hat hackers, and it has happened in the past. But I do want to give the disclaimer that it's not encouraged. You can look into things like, capture the flag events, or you can look at bug bounties, where companies will actually give you an environment where you can do these hacks from being like, a penetration tester that's not exactly a penetration tester, and win great prizes, or even, employment with the company at the end of the whole experience. Thanks, no problem, you guys. Thank you so much. I feel so inspired. I'm really glad. We really need more people within the field who are inspired to make a difference and a change. And how I found my particular niche in cybersecurity. So interesting fact is I still haven't quite narrowed down my niche in cybersecurity. And that's kind of what I'm using my internship for. So it was really eye-opening to learn about the various fields that do exist, what they can do. And that made me actually re-question what I thought I wanted to do. So right now I'm working on application security, and on my spare time, I work on learning more about ethical hacking and different tools and tricks. One really, really common thing in cybersecurity is creating your own niche. The language and the concepts we learn are so applicable across the board that learning one thing doesn't necessarily, take you away from learning a different thing or specializing in a different thing. And some people have been in the field for 10, 15 years, working various jobs because the skills are so translatable, and then they find out what they're important in, interested in. So I think the best way would be to just dive right in, get started, and start doing things that help you figure out what you like, what you don't like, etc. Okay. But it's an urban myth that black hat hackers who hack. I've heard the same myth. I think there is some truth to that, particularly not with Apple, but they do. If you can hack into Apple, they'll swoop you right up because it's supposed to be unpenetrable. My favorite Catch the Flag website. Okay, so before Catch the Flags, I think I really, really like Hack the Box or tryhackme.com. They let you walk through in stages, and they let you walk through, from beginner all the way to the end. These are free resources. They do have paid, options available, but try with tryhackme.com, and then with Capture the Flag, Hackbox is a great one, and they do a lot of new machines, and then those get retired, and you can group up with people or tackle them alone, whatever you want. I'm not sure if you mentioned this already, but what kind of work have you done in cybersecurity? Most interesting work that you've done. So what kind of work I've done in cybersecurity? So my research itself, it's focusing on application of game theory for making very intelligent intrusion detection systems. So how can we teach these systems to be 4 or 5 steps ahead of the hackers or malicious people that will try and get in, and already anticipate based on what they want to gain and what type of system exists, what they're going to want to get from the system, and then teach our intrusion detection system to be 3 steps ahead, so you can stop the attack before it's even happening. And I'm focusing on intelligent transportation systems, which are going to be huge given the connected cars that are coming up. A lot of cars already have Wi-Fi. And I think it's going to be about 70% of cars that are released in 2020 that were supposed to have Wi-Fi capabilities. So that's kind of the area that I focus on. But within Deloitte itself right now, I'm looking at different industries and looking at application security and of their internal networks and how to best devise and create security programs so that they have a good, solid system from the inside out. I've been working on TryHackMe. Yeah, TryHackMe is a really good website. That's how I got started. If you're even new to coding itself, the great resource is Code Academy, absolutely free. And that's where I learned how to do, HTML, JavaScript, CSS. I think they also have some great machine learning modules now and Python. So it's great for web application. And then JavaScript is cross applicable to different types of applications as well. Awesome. You guys are welcome. Thank you. Is there any questions I've missed, or anybody else have any other questions? Okay, awesome. Thanks for being a great audience, you guys. I'm going to let you have a really quick break before Anika pops on here. Yeah, no problem, Wendy. Thank you.